A 100-meter yacht, I don't give a shit about it, you understand? How many bitches are you fucking there? What kind of chicks? I mean, these gorgeous or silky ones, fuck, you're flying into space, I don't give a shit about it, you understand? In my knowledge, have become so fulfilled that as if already 100 trillion billion years, I've been living on trillions and trillions of the same planets, you know, like this Earth. I already comprehend this world fully, and I am here seeing just one thing.
All I care about is which Devil May Cry pulls my devil trigger the hardest. The game that started it all, the love child of Hideki Kamiya, which was originally intended to be Resident Evil 4 and was changed into its own thing during development, as the team behind it felt that the game didn't fit the Resident Evil franchise. But we all know what happened. What happened was this beautiful cocktail of gunfire, stylish swordplay, funky one-liners and art style that still holds up to this day. There's a reason why the original Devil May Cry is considered to be one of the greatest games of all time. The overall aesthetic reminds me a lot of the old Resident Evil games. What a surprise, right? With a haunted mansion being replaced by a great castle with gothic architecture. Some people even say that the first DMC has a bit of a horror vibe going on, and I agree with this sentiment to a certain point. It definitely gives an uneasy feeling when navigating through the levels, especially in the later parts of the game when the lights go out and your only source of light is, Dante's anal plug, I guess? Cause I don't see any flashlight on him. Do you? Okay, it's confirmed, Dante walks around with a lit up anal plug while killing demons. What a great way to begin the video about the legendary franchise, I know.
What a big surprise. I hope for your sake you got something inside that big body of yours.
Anyway, apart from the questionable light source, the rest of the visuals are very nice and give that classic early PS2 vibe when the developers were still unraveling the true potential and power of the new hardware. The whole game feels very much like an idea that was first born during the PS1 life cycle, but finally came to fruition on its more powerful successor. Sure, by today's standards it might not look as impressive or have a particularly well written story, but the gameplay and the overall presentation are solid, and I generally had a blast while playing through this game. As I've mentioned earlier, the story is really nothing to write home about. We have a demon hunter with attitude problems called Dante, who runs a small firm called, you guessed it, Devil May Cry, that specializes in exterminating outer world creatures from our realm. One day, a woman named Trish walks into Dante's office, and after a brief conversation first sticks a sword into his chest and then proceeds to throw a motorcycle at our protagonist.
Sword. Time to go to work, guys.
I mean, does it really matter what the story is about after witnessing a scene like that? Okay. The premise is that a long time ago there was a famous demon hunter named Sparda who defeated a demon lord Mundus, whose name sounds a bit like the word dingus. Anyway, let's continue. Many years later, Mundus, just like literally every somewhat notable band from the 20th century, decided to make a comeback in the present day and once again try to conquer Earth. In his way stands our hero Dante, the offspring of Sparda with impeccable strength, reflexes and regeneration skills. So, after the motorcycle incident, Dante and Trish set out to the castle on a remote island where Mundus is plotting his scheme. I swear, this has to be the most B-movie premise that I have ever seen. And not in a bad way by any means. I have great respect towards Hideki Kamiya and his work, but by god, this is goofy goober levels of silliness, and I love it. To be honest, after the initial cutscenes we barely get any meaningful exposition almost until the very end. In this sense, Devil May Cry follows the traditions of classic Resident Evil games, but cuts down slightly on the things that made the original RE trilogy a bit slow at times. For example, we're not overloaded with snippets of information, there's no real element of mystery and fear of the unknown, where the only way to understand what's going on was to actually read different logs, journals, and random pieces of toilet paper some crazy scientist decided to leave a note on. Devil May Cry is a very straightforward game when it comes to narration.
Mundus.
The same cannot be said for the navigation and the overall gameplay. You get the classic Resident Evil where the fuck do I go and why the fuck do I need to track all the way back to the first room of the level situation, but that's to be expected. I knew exactly what I was getting myself into when I booted up the original Devil May Cry. For me, the biggest surprise was how buttery smooth the movement and combat were once I got the hang of things. Sure, the first game doesn't go completely over the limit with flashy combat and ridiculous weaponry, but the main gameplay loop is solid, and you get plenty of tools to dispose of your enemies. From the iconic ebony and ivory dual pistols and the sawed-off shotgun, to more brutal weaponry like the grenade launcher and some mystical experimental gun that fires bouncy lasers. And let's not forget the sheer variety of different melee weapons with different swords to choose from, and Ifrit Fists of Fire with a moveset that gives me God Hand vibes, though I could be entirely wrong, and they didn't use the same animations 5 years down the road in God Hand, so don't quote me on that please. And then there's the now iconic Devil Trigger where Dante channels his inner demon and acquires superhuman abilities for a brief period of time. It's a real lifesaver and got me out of a few sticky situations during my playthrough, as not only does it allow to shoot lightnings and fire from your hands with extra damage from melee attacks, but also slowly regenerates your health, which is crucial, especially considering how scarce the health pickups are, and you can only carry one health star. Come to think of it, this is such a Hideki Kamiya thing to do, limit the health drops and only allow to carry one extra healing item. Okay, maybe two, but no more. And now I know where this evil genius did it first. I like the strategic element when it comes to choosing the loadout, as different weapons are more effective against certain foes. Though I gotta say that I abused the shit out of the grenade launcher, so may the DMC fans forgive me for I have sinned. Any true Devil May Cry enthusiast will probably have a stroke just from one look at my gameplay recordings, but at least it was fun for me, despite not having the necessary skills to perform amazing juggle combos that you would expect to see in a game like this. Besides, I believe that it really takes a lot of practice to pull off good long strings of moves in DMC1, so I tip my hat to those who can do that. Difficulty-wise, Devil May Cry is tough but fair, apart from the final boss, who is arguably the definition of a cheap bastard with tons of bullshit. It took me quite a long time to finally put Mr. Dingus down, using everything I've learned from my entire playthrough, even the most niche mechanics that were literally used only once previously. After about an hour or two of endless attempts, blood, sweat, tears, and agonizing pain in my lower section, I got the bastard. And you think, awesome, thank God it's over. One issue though, it's a Capcom game. And like many Capcom games, the very last mission is another run against the clock as the castle collapses around us and the whole palace is about to explode. It's such a certified Capcom moment that I can't even complain about this much. I would honestly be more surprised if the game didn't end with something like this. It's like ordering chips and expecting mustard or cheese sauce for dipping. A match made in heaven, if you know what I mean.
Let's rock.
All in all, Devil May Cry 1 is a fabulous game, a real testament to how great gameplay and art direction can outweigh any small issues, stand the test of time, and still be as enjoyable as it was when it initially came out more than 20 years ago. It has all the classic Capcom tropes with great Kamiya vision, complementing each other like a glass of Bordeaux, with Rockford on the side. It's a certified classic that paved the way for many great games and left a lasting legacy, as this is the only Devil May Cry game that was made by Team Little Devils with Kamiya at the wheel. I suggest any video game enthusiast to at least give this game a try. Besides, it doesn't overstay its welcome and can take roughly 2 relatively long evenings to complete. So, not only is it a fun experience, but also one of those awesome games that does its thing and leaves you satisfied without dragging on for too long. Well, here we go. The second least talked about Devil May Cry game. The bastardized sequel to an absolute banger. The epitome of mediocrity and corporate bullshit of the early 2000s. If you thought that nowadays games are soulless rehashes that suck on existing franchises like Parasites, then wait till you see Devil May Cry 2. And it's not like the general aura surrounding this game had anything to do with my initial perception. I actually made a conscious decision to do my best and not let pre-existing opinions shape the way I feel about Devil May Cry 2. And I actually like the first couple of missions and the gameplay tweaks that were made when compared to the first title. However, very soon I realized what the buzz was all about as I delved deeper into this incredibly short and uninspired game. By the time I finished the Dante campaign, my save clocked at just under 4 hours, which is abysmal to say the least. Sure, this game has 2 stories which were originally printed on 2 separate discs, but I honestly couldn't care less about the Lucia missions, which are practically a rehash of Dante's adventure, but in a slightly different order. Yeah, you're free to hate me for not completing the game, but it is what it is. If the game was actually decent, I would quite happily jump into the second campaign, but for me playing through one was more than enough. The best word to describe Devil May Cry 2 is soulless. And it's not like the game itself is bad or buggy, it just feels uninspired and bland, with little to no variety in the combat and builds, no strategy involved in tackling the enemies, and an even less coherent story. And to think that I considered the narration of the first game bare bones and choppy. At least it was there! At least there was some dialogue that actually made sense. In DMC2 I lost the trail of the story after about 2 cutscenes. All I remember that there was this bad guy named Arius, who serves some demon lord, or is a demon lord himself, and he wants to conquer Earth by opening a portal using some dumbass trinkets. Oh, and he's supposed to be this extravagant multi-billionaire businessman, philanthrop, etc. At least his dialogues made me laugh out loud due to how cringy they were, so there's something for you. I've seen a lot of complaints that Dante's character was changed a lot, and he felt like a shallow shell of the original. But honestly, I didn't feel this way towards this iteration, as I don't think that he was a particularly well written character to begin with, but that's just my opinion and who cares what a random idiot on the internet says. Hey, at least I finally got to see where the coin gimmick came from. In case you didn't know, Dante was a guest character in Shin Megami Tensei 3, and there is a moment in the game where he flips a coin to decide how much you have to pay him for joining your party. So it was a very cool moment for me personally, as I really like SMT3 and his character in that game. In terms of the visuals, the game arguably looks more modern and polished when compared to the original, with bigger areas that offer some variety in terms of navigation. I might be wrong and it's entirely my weird perception, but finally the backgrounds looked like they were fully 3D rendered, as opposed to DMC1 that had this pre-rendered classic Resident Evil environments. But then again, I could be completely talking shit out of my ass, so feel free to correct me in the comments. Besides, it's just this feeling I've had, which doesn't necessarily mean it was the case. Just a matter of perception. However, these open levels highlight the biggest issue of Devil May Cry 2. The absolute dogshit enemies and next to no variety in the combat. The best way to describe how most fights, especially with the bosses, happen is...
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang! Bang! Well, I don't see so good, so I missed. Then they ran away. I ran after them. Okay. Bang! Try to shoot them in the back. But I don't want so good either.
And I'm not even joking, just watch how I thought the penultimate boss... How exciting, right? I know it's all up to me how to tackle each enemy, and one could argue that it's my fault that I made things so boring. But why wasn't this the case in the first game? Why did I actually have to think about what I was doing, and choose my loadout to suit a particular fight better? Here I just upgraded the base weapons and that was it. I hardly ever used anything else and beat the game without too much difficulty. And it's such a pity because Devil May Cry 2 has lots of different runes to fine-tune your Devil Trigger mode and weapons to use that allegedly have an impact on your playthrough. But there was no incentive to even use these things, as the game never really pushed me up against the wall and forced me to try a different approach. I mean, what's the point of having 20 swords and guns in your pocket when the basic dual pistols with some upgrades get the job done just as well? What I did like were the little tweaks made in the controls, where you no longer have to hold a combination of buttons in order to perform some of the moves. Dante became much more agile and fun to control, even if it came at the cost of unlocking new moves and skills. Honestly, there's not much else to say about Devil May Cry 2. It's a very bland and surprisingly tiring experience, despite occupying less than 5 hours of your time. It feels like a recycle of everything from the previous game, including the bosses. I mean, just take a look at this fucking monstrosity. It's literally most of the bosses from the first 2 games piled in a disgusting mush, as well as other titles from the Capcom library. The power plant level gave me some serious Resident Evil flashbacks with these elevators and the overall layout. So, now I know why fans and critics alike were not too fond of this game. It's just one of these titles that doesn't really stay in your memory, and all you can say after some time is, yeah, I beat DMC2. And that's not saying much really.
My name is Dante. Yo.
I am the son of Sparta. Yo. Pussy.
This game almost broke me, but I enjoyed every last second of it. Call me a masochist, but Devil May Cry 3 is the entry in the series that gave me such an ass whooping that I was on the verge of quitting my idea to beat every mainline DMC title, as this is the hardest game in the entire franchise and arguably one of the hardest video games that I have ever played. And I honestly believe that this is the best Devil May Cry in the entire series.
This is what I live for! Sorry, not open for business yet.
DMC3 serves as a prequel to the first game, telling us the story of a young Dante and how we got to the events of Devil May Cry 1. It's a long road filled with traps, memorable bosses, betrayal, and an ongoing family feud that lasts to this day. That last part was a bit too dramatic even for my taste. It's as if I'm telling you a story of events that actually took place and continue to haunt humanity to this very day. I mean, I wouldn't mind to see all the crazy shit from Devil May Cry happen in real life. But let's be honest, none of us would survive this unless there are offsprings of Sparda among us.
Let's welcome chaos.
Anyway, unlike the previous installments where there was a story but it was more of an afterthought and gave way to the flashy combos and a fuck ton of weapons to play with, Devil May Cry 3 finally has a proper cast of truly memorable characters who play a vital role in the narrative and actually have some motivation to partake in this rollercoaster of a story. Everyone except for Dante, who only finds a reason to keep going somewhere in the middle of the game. At first he just wants to meddle with his brother's activities, but later realizes the reason why he wants to stop him, no matter the cost. I don't mean to say that the story of Devil May Cry 3 is great simply due to its complexity, but it's a lot more fledged out than the ones that came before it, and it's a good thing. Overall, while playing through the first 3 Devil May Cry games, it was interesting to observe not only how the series changed over time, but how the technology evolved, and how the developers learned more and more about the PlayStation 2 as it went further into its life cycle. Devil May Cry 3 is arguably the pinnacle of the series, offering most of the mechanics and weaponry that are used in the latest installments more than 10 years after its release. Not only did this game influence its own franchise, but also clearly gave inspiration for many games that came after it. Agony and Runda kicked ass so that Ornstein and Smoke could be mind-numbingly bullshit bastards. Nevan was a teleporting, lightning-striking, blood-sucking bitch so that any other projectile bullet-hell boss could make our lives a misery. And Virgil... don't even get me started on Virgil. I spent almost 2 entire hours just trying to beat him in the final mission. That's all you need to know about this guy. At a certain point I thought to myself, man, fuck this shit, it's not worth it, I've already completed the game so I can watch the ending on YouTube. It's fine, don't torture yourself, as this guy is clearly not meant to be defeated. However, I held my shit together and kept on going. I once saw a Dark Souls review on Steam that read the following: playing this game is comparable to trying to crush a brick with a soft penis. Well, the person who wrote this clearly has never faced Virgil in his final form. When reading about DMC3, I came across an article listing Virgil as one of the hardest bosses in video game history. And I know that there is someone out there who can beat him on the hardest difficulty with his eyes closed, hands tied behind his back, while using an inverted Nintendo 64 controller. But for a regular human being, Virgil is a tough cookie to say the least, and beating him on the brink of death felt better than any climax that I've ever experienced in my entire life.
Is that all you got?
Speaking of climaxes, most boss fights ended like a delightful conclusion to a long and sweaty intercourse. Well, that being with a controller, of course. As I struggled to figure out their moves, memorize each attack pattern, and wrestle them into submission. And I believe that's the beauty of Devil May Cry 3. It's a game that is as harsh and unforgiving as it is rewarding and satisfying once you finally get through another challenge that it throws at you. It's a perfect blend of bizarre yet gripping storytelling, mixed with the most polished gameplay that offers a tough, but mostly fair challenge that kept me on the edge of my seat throughout the entire playthrough. All of this is complemented by one of the best soundtracks in the business and an art style to match, making it one hell of a cocktail that will hit you right in the forehead and leave you begging for more. That is until you have to face the final boss and get a serious hangover that will force you to take a break from Devil May Cry for a while, which is exactly what I ended up doing. This entry was supposed to be somewhat special to me as it was my first introduction to the Devil May Cry series back in 2008. It was during that time when I seriously got invested into gaming and started reading dedicated magazines that showcase the latest and greatest upcoming games. Then I saw an article about the newest entry in the legendary Japanese franchise. Of course, I had no idea what this was all about, but I thought that the screenshots looked cool, so I picked up the game as soon as I could find a pirated copy. And yes, this was a thing back in my childhood to sell pirated compilation discs mainly for the PC, PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360, as well as hacking PSPs. I remember vividly that I wanted to play this game but didn't have a console at the time, nor a controller for that matter, so you can imagine how fun it was trying to play an action slasher game on PC with a mouse and keyboard. All I can remember from that time is I got stuck somewhere before the second major boss in the castle. That's about mission 5 or 6, which makes it roughly a quarter through the game, in case you're wondering. And I gave up because I had no idea what to do and ran out of patience. And since this wasn't a licensed game, I just switched to something else that was burned on the same disc. Now, after nearly 16 years, I cannot fathom what exactly troubled me so much that I quit the game entirely. Neither the puzzles nor the combat are particularly challenging in Devil May Cry 4, especially when compared with the third installment. I don't know what's up with the Devil May Cry series, but it seems like every time it's time to release an even-numbered entry, the developers run out of steam and deliver a title that is significantly weaker than the previous game. Starting with a story that can be best described as cryptic and confusing, I remember how I couldn't understand what was going on back in 2008, and I swear I'd have the same feeling right now had I not completed the previous 3 games and knew who Dante was. I get it that Capcom wanted to introduce a new generation of players to Devil May Cry, and what better way to do this than add a new playable character who is as confused as the player and has very vague understanding of who this blonde dickhead in the red cape is.
Adios, kid.
But for returning players, I don't think this is the best course of action. I mean, why spend nearly a decade building up an iconic character, give us his entire backstory, only to make him play second fiddle to a new and far less likable hero? And I know this is subjective, but Nero sucks ass. From his moveset, which is, to its credit, freshens things up and offers different gameplay experiences, to his Backstreet Boys-esque look, to his edgy teenager attitude that makes him look like a Dante wannabe.
We're closed.
It's like, Mom, can we get Dante? No, we have Dante at home. And then you see this guy, Dante at home.
Then come and get it.
It does sound harsh and very narrow-minded, but I just prefer Dante more, and was delighted when I finally got to play as him somewhere past the midway point of the story. In case you're wondering what it's about, there is some sort of a cult that lives in a seemingly remote place where they worship Sparda, Dante's demonic father, as God and Savior. Nero, the main protagonist, is with them. He goes to church on Sundays so that the chick he likes would go out with him on Friday night, but the pastor gets shot by a mysterious man in a red cape, and now Nero is on a quest to catch this man and bring him to justice. Along the way, we of course find out that nothing's what it seems and decide to stop the evil cult from doing evil cult things, like summoning demons to resurrect a false god and take control over the world. Yeah, it's better to experience this glorious mess for yourself than me trying to explain it. I mean, it's a good story overall with nods to previous parts that only the veterans of the series would notice. The gameplay is nice and tight with new elements like Nero's arm that got the legendary skin due to overstimulation. It was a bit awkward getting used to the new moveset after dancing with Dante 3 games in a row, but 2 or 3 missions in, things finally started to click, and I was pulling and smashing my enemies to the ground like it was my second nature. Though I did find Nero's arsenal to be very limited when compared to the toys that Dante got. His gameplay, especially in the third game, was always this combination of magic, swordplay, outrageous guns that were used in most over-the-top way possible. I mean, what else can I say? Dante got flair and style, and the MC4 is no exception to this rule. From the iconic Rebellion sword coupled with ebony and ivory dual pistols, to the hefty shotgun power gloves, not these, needle gun from Halo on steroids, and the literal Pandora's box. More like a Pandora's suitcase, but that's besides the point. There's something for everyone to enjoy. I believe Devil May Cry 4 is the first entry in the series to introduce simplified controls and a way bigger variety of difficulty levels to choose from. I tried the auto combo mode for a bit, got bored, and switched back to the regular controls. It's not a particularly difficult game to begin with, so I personally don't see any point of dumbing it down any further. Come to think of it, Devil May Cry 4 is one of the best entry points into the series for those who have never experienced the older games. It's got very nice graphics, even for their time. They have somehow, for the most part, avoided the yellow piss filters synonymous with the games of the late 2000s, early 2010s, solid gameplay that can be fine-tuned based on your level of competence, and an overall presentation with kick-ass music that makes you feel a part of a bombastic cinematic experience. And though it was clear from the previous game, but I think it was with Devil May Cry 4 that the developers finally made the decision to make DMC games as flashy and stylish as possible. Even though I like this game way less than DMC 3 and slightly less than DMC 1, I think it's still worth a try if you want to get that classic late 2000s experience with good gameplay to back it up. And so, I finally got to the game that got me to start this marathon in the first place. The DMC Devil May Cry from 2013 in its glorious definitive edition. Just kidding, Devil May Cry 5 of course.
What day is it?
The 15th of June.
A month?
Just the sheer number of memes from this game was more than enough to get me hooked. And that's before I actually got to play it. After a questionable attempt to introduce a new protagonist to the series in Devil May Cry 4, and whatever the hell the 2013 reboot was, Capcom decided to double down on the idea of two main heroes, but did it in a way so that neither of them felt like an afterthought for pointless filler episodes in the story.
And I was certain.
And it's not like the Devil May Cry games are well known for their intricate stories, as you've probably figured out if you made it this far into the video. But even in this glorious and at times hilarious mess, there has to be at least a little bit of cohesion and continuity. Thankfully, instead of just shoving characters down our throat and expecting the players to just deal with it, the writers made most of the main cast a proper introduction and an explanation of how they ended up where they were at the beginning of the game. I can't figure out whether Capcom ran out of ideas for Devil May Cry villains, or this was done intentionally as a return to form with all the fan-favorite characters making their grand return, but once again we'll witness another chapter of a never-ending sibling rivalry between Dante and Virgil. Though this time, Virgil split himself into two separate entities, one being a demonic side, while the other his humanity. Basically, we spend the majority of the game trying to take down a quote-unquote demon king, who we believe to be this grand final boss. A demon to end all demons, if you like. Only to get a rather predictable twist closer to the end of the game, where it turns out it was Virgil all along. So basically it's Devil May Cry 3 all over again, but with more detail and time dedicated to each of the playable characters. Instead of getting vague descriptions of what happened all those years ago, we finally get to see some of the key events from Dante's and Virgil's childhood with our own eyes, and understand these characters way better than before, as well as find the root of their rivalry. We also learn more about Nero, and his character developed from this cocky foul-mouthed boy to a more mature and sensible man with a clearer mind than that of his father and uncle. It's not a particularly well written or sensible story with many silly gags and corny one-liners, but as Mr. Todd Howard would say,
all of this just works.
And it works so well in fact, that all I wanted after the final credits rolled was another game in the series. And then we get Peak of Combat on iOS and Android. Definitely not the another game in the series that I had in mind, but anyway, here's Wonderwall.
I'm gonna go take care of old douchebag.
Right, where were we? Yeah, the gameplay. In short, it's great. The pacing, the intensity, the style, it's all here and with a fresh coat of paint. Couple this with amazing visuals, a banging soundtrack, and you get into a state of euphoria where everything is sharp and precise as a straight razor in hands of a skilled barber. And all this glory is running at rock solid 60 frames per second in beautiful 4K. I mean, what else could an action game enjoyer ask for? This time we get 3 playable characters with distinct combat styles. Nero finally got the killer feature with the new Devil Breaker prosthetic arms that can be swapped mid-combat and offer many different attacks, ranging from gunfire and execution to healing and the ability to stop time, just like Dio did in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Dante makes a return as the legendary corny devil hunter, who looks more like the funny uncle who gets drunk at a Thanksgiving party and tries to show you magic tricks that inevitably backfire, causing multiple casualties. Come to think of it, it makes sense story-wise, but I think it's a mere coincidence, and he's getting old after all. You get all the traditional bells and whistles that can be expected from Dante, plus callbacks to some of the weapons that he wielded in the previous installments. And then there's the scarf and the hat. And then there's V, arguably the least interesting character to play as from the three, but he also brings something new to the table, with a focus on being more of a field commander than a sword-wielding pistol-firing demon slayer. The thing is, V stands for very weak, as he cannot engage in hand-to-hand combat and relies on 3 shadow entities that he summons to fight the demons. The good thing about this setup is that you can easily rack up the style points for a triple S combo rank, and easily farm red orbs to buy upgrades for the other characters. However, V can be a bit boring to control, as you don't really get the same variety of attacks that Dante and Nero have. Still, it was an interesting experience playing this V. What struck me is the number of throwbacks to the previous games, and not just 3 and 4 but also the original and even the second installment. It's nice to see familiar faces and enemies that at least resemble some of the foes from the older titles, not to mention references to places and events that happened during our first introduction to Dante.
What happened? My dumbass brother's back and I'm gonna rip him a new one.
Devil May Cry 5 feels like this ultimate mix of everything that was great about the series, combining the best elements from each installment while adding enough original content to keep things fresh and exciting all the way until the final credits. If after the third game, as great as it was, I needed to take a break due to feeling exhausted from the non-stop action, then after beating 5 I was up for more and could easily take another 8 to 10 hour game like this without any second thoughts. Even if you've never touched the Devil May Cry games before, 5 is arguably one of the best points of entry into the series, which is sure to give you a good time.
Don't you dare say it, jackpot!
Well, I guess it's time to decide which Devil May Cry I enjoy the most and make my tier list of the games in the series to determine which is the best one in my humble opinion. If you made it this far, then I applaud you for your patience and thank you so much for sticking around, as I can only imagine how long this video will turn out to be.
You're breathtaking! You're all breathtaking!
What the hell is this?
When playing through each game and writing down my thoughts about them, I was always wondering what exactly made me enjoy one installment more than the other. Because on surface level all of the Devil May Cry games follow a somewhat similar pattern and offer roughly the same experience, which makes sense as they are part of a franchise renowned for its over-the-top action sequences and time-precise combat. That's like saying all of the Souls games are pretty much the same, with a few changes here and there. And then it hit me. The thing that really sets every game apart is the way the boss fights are handled, how difficult they are and how much planning they require. If in Devil May Cry 2 you can beat almost all of the bosses by just fully upgrading your basic guns, keeping your distance and firing until your finger hurts, then nearly every boss in Devil May Cry 3 will beat the ever-living shit out of Dante if you don't pay attention to their attack patterns and choose the time when to attack. So, a lot in my rating has to do with how memorable and tough the boss battles were.
You're sweet.
So without further ado, here's my Devil Trigger ranking for the Devil May Cry games. It was a really close call between 3 and 5 for me, as they both feature the same final boss who is an icon himself. It's just that with all the bells and whistles that 5 has, it's nowhere near as tough as the third game. DMC3 pulled no punches and really made me work for each victory over the bosses. And it's not like 3 is better than 5, because hard games are always better, get good you chump. It's just that I'm still thinking about these hours I've spent trying to beat Virgil in 3, and how easy it was to beat him in 5, without really having to fully restart the level. This is mostly thanks to the stupid amount of golden orbs that allow you to continue your progress from the exact point you've died, but still, even with one continue, it felt way easier to beat, making the climax of the game less climactic, if it makes sense. As for the other 3 games, I enjoyed 1 and 4 with all their ups and downs. I respect them for kickstarting this legendary franchise and then opening a brand new chapter in the story. And 2 is just 2. I didn't have any expectations when booting it up and knew almost nothing about it apart from the fact that many people called it a bad game. And it's not inherently bad, it's just bland from the start to finish. Which is why, rather predictably, it sits at the bottom of my list. Ironically, the marathon ended on perhaps one of the shittiest days I've had this year so far. I was exhausted and frustrated and in desperate need to let off steam and beat something up. And I've just had what the doctors ordered. The last 3 levels of Devil May Cry 5 that essentially are 3 boss fights one after another. And boy did I beat the ever-living shit out of Virgil. Twice. First as his brother, and still the best protagonist in the series, Dante, and then Virgil's offspring Nero, who most likely will be the main and only hero of the 6th game. Yeah, like that will ever happen.
It's like staring into a backed up toilet.
I just love how every Devil May Cry game manages to walk the fine line between serious and ridiculous. One moment is drama over a lost sibling, and then a random solo on a woman that turned into a guitar, or a dick joke inserted at just the right moment. Devil May Cry is wacky over-the-top action at its finest, and long may it be this way. There's really something special about this franchise, and I cannot recommend these games enough to anyone who wants to have a good laugh, engaging gameplay, and something that won't take up half of your lifespan to complete. And which is your favorite Devil May Cry game? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy my content, please be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, take care, and remember, only play games that are worth your time. See you in the next one. Bye.
Got something to wear that's good for digging?